get ready, brace yourselves for Jalen Hurts to be ranked ahead in quarterback rankings ahead of Lamar Jackson for 2025. In fact, and I'm just talking about 2025 rankings. I'm not talking about who's best overall. Why would I bet some people will say, hey, I'm going to put Jalen Hurts above Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, why not? And I'm not talking about one of those rankings that it's like, who you drafting today? Because I still think people would take Mahomes over Hurts. But if we're talking about going into the 2025 season, quarterback rankings, he could be number 1 or often number 2 on the list. And then people will be fighting for 3, 4, and 5 with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Bobby, you and I discussed this because last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm losing track of time now, Cam Newton was on First Take. And the question that was posed to him was at first posed, would you trade a Super Bowl appearance for your MVP? I would never choose an appearance where you lose for an actual MVP that you won. I would never do that. But along the way, the conversation kind of changed, and it was, would you trade your MVP for a Super Bowl? And he said no. So that kind of launched this bigger conversation, Bobby, of where do you rank Jalen Hurts with all these other quarterbacks not named Patrick Mahomes? Both you and I said, for Jalen Hurts to leapfrog these 3 that are always like fighting for that spot behind Patrick Mahomes, in order for him to leapfrog him, it wouldn't just be that he has to win. It would be that they would have to win big with a lot of points, and he would have to be a main driver. And Bobby, he accomplished that.
He did.
He was 17 of 22, only had 5 incompletions for 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, a quarterback rating for 119.7, and he added 11 rushes for 72 yards and a touchdown. And you know, the Chiefs had the correct strategy, which was, we're not going to let Saquon Barkley destroy us. We're going to say, Jalen Hurts, we're going to take him mostly out of the game, and you're going to have to beat us. And Bobby, if the Chiefs had been told, hey, you're going to keep Saquon Barkley to less than 100 rushing yards, he had 57 rushing yards on 25 attempts for a 2.3 yard average and no touchdowns. If you told Steve Spagnuolo, hey, this is what your strategy is going to get you with Saquon Barkley, he'd be like, sweet, we're going to win. This is the right strategy. We're going to win. Because they dared Jalen Hurts to beat him, and he did. He absolutely, absolutely did. So now, I'm going to get into some of the comments of people talking about where he ranks. Do you have any more thoughts on that, of just how not that they just won and won big, but that he was a main driver?
The dude's he rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
You know, he, like I said earlier on, he's now played 2 of his best career games when it's mattered most in the last 2 Super Bowls that he's played in. 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls, Jalen Hurts has been elite. And so, yeah, you did bring this in from Robert Griffin III, who made these comments prior to the game. And he said if Jalen Hurts and the Eagles win the Super Bowl, which they have now, he won't be in the same category of Lamar, Burrow, Josh. He'll be in a category above them in the one that matters most, Super Bowl champ. With all due respect to anyone who thinks differently, F out of here. Hey. Now, he just quote tweeted this, and I have it right here. We'll do a screen share feature. And he quote tweets himself now that the game is over and says, Jalen Hurts haters are big mad. Jalen is not in the same category as Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. He's in a category above them where it matters the most. He's a Super Bowl champion. Better player? No. More talented? No. But you will respect his ring and his story. That from RG3.
That I think is fair. Is he a better player? Like if you had a draft and you put Lamar and Jalen, I'm still taking Lamar. But if we go back to the question that was posed to Cam Newton when they said, would you trade your MVP for a Super Bowl win? And he said no. That's because a lot of guys have Super Bowl wins, but they're not like the main reasons, right? But as a quarterback, I would 1,000%, and may I be so bold as to speak for Lamar Jackson at this point. I usually refrain from this. I do not like it when people speak for Lamar, but I will be a little bit more bold this time around. Do I think Lamar would trade his regular season MVP for a Super Bowl MVP and a ring? Yeah, I do. I do think he would. And I think anybody who's being honest with themselves would trade a league MVP for a Super Bowl ring and Super Bowl MVP. So listen, I think
I don't
he's
even
right.
think you needed to set that up so carefully.
Well,
listen, he's made it pretty clear, partner, over the years. I think you could stick your neck out there on that one.
Well, I just did. I just wanted to point out I didn't want to be a hypocrite because I don't like it when people speak for him. But on that one, I think he's given us enough indicators that that's where he would go. And I think what Robert is saying here is true. He's like, is he the better, or is Jalen Hurts the better player? No. Is he more talented? No. But you will respect his ring and his story. Yeah. And he didn't just outplay Patrick Mahomes yesterday, but he did it in that first Super Bowl matchup. But Mahomes got the win.
Yeah.
But you know, Hurts had the better game. And so there's that one. And then we can go back to here. Ryan Clark. Here's what he had to say after the game yesterday. He said, Josh, Joe, and Lamar have had their shots at the throne. Joe beat Patrick, and Josh had his days. But none of them have stood up across from 15 like Jalen Hurts. Maybe he's never mentioned in the same breath as the others, but for now, there's a convo only he and Patrick Mahomes are in, which is Super Bowl MVP. When the football historians sit back and watch their matchups, he needed to clarify this. He wanted to make sure everybody knows that he's talking about their matchups. When you watch their matchups, it's going to be hard for them to tell who this era's guy was. Hurts has just been better. Congrats to the Eagles. So he's referring to at the end because he's saying it's going to be, historians looking back, it's like, who's going to be the guy of the era? Well, obviously it's Patrick Mahomes thus far. But when you look at their matchups, Hurts has outplayed him in both those Super Bowl games, even though they're split in the wins. And so, again, I don't know that I'm drafting Hurts above these guys, but I'm also not going to punish him the way people have punished Lamar for having Derrick Henry in his backfield. Like, for sure, it helps Jalen Hurts that his defensive line is beating up Patrick Mahomes, right? It for sure helps Jalen Hurts that he's got Saquon Barkley, although, you know, the Chiefs could have used their running backs a little bit more yesterday. That's on their coaches. But I'm not going to punish him for having a better overall team than I think maybe these three other quarterbacks have had when they faced Patrick Mahomes. I'm not going to punish him for that because he also played well when his number was called upon. You know, he had those numbers that we talked about, and he had deep passes, he had short passes, he ran with his legs, like he did everything that he was supposed to do. So he likely will be ranked ahead of these three guys for the 2025 season, but the era isn't over yet. It's just not. But here's what they had to say. Stephen A. Smith's reaction to Ryan Clark's tweet right here.
RC said, I dispute not a syllable of what RC uttered. He's in a conversation that Joe Burrow is not in, that Lamar Jackson is not in, that Josh Allen is not in, and that is Super Bowl MVP. And by the way, Jalen Hurts has played better against Patrick Mahomes than any of them have. Even with the sensational performances that Josh Allen has put forth, it still resulted in an L because he couldn't do what Patrick Mahomes ultimately was able to do against his squad. That is not the case with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts didn't get the ball back in Super Bowl 57. They had a lead with, a tie score rather, with about 5 minutes and 15 seconds left, and they never got the ball back. He gets a second go round, and they obliterate.
All right, so no lies there, Bobby. And then also last week when we talked about, like, is Jalen Hurts on their level? It's like, well, he's really just not even asked to. He's not even asked to, so he doesn't have those rushing yards. He doesn't even have those rushes. Well, here he is being like, told you, media, told you I could do this. I just haven't been asked to.
Over the course of our year, you guys have heard me say, just because we don't doesn't mean we can't. And when you hear a statement like that, I think it always comes down to, what is your mission? Why are you doing this? I'm doing it to win. I do it to win.
And that's it. That's it, right? You do it to win. And he said all year long, like you said at the top, just because I don't doesn't mean I can't. And in a lot of ways, that was Lamar Jackson in the Greg Roman era, right? Where it was just like the handcuffs were not removed. And so it's been more removed. But now it's up to the Ravens to surround Lamar the way the Eagles have surrounded Jalen Hurts, and the Ravens have gotten better for sure with the weapons. But you got to continue with those trenches, which we've already mentioned before.
Dude's a winner, man. That press conference right there just shows like the security he had, the self security, the self-confidence, the leadership. We all know his story from Alabama to Oklahoma. The dude's a winner. The dude's an absolute winner. And so I think a lot of those points stand from Ryan Clark, from RG3, and now obviously it's just going to take one of these guys that's in that second tier to break through. Mm-hmm. And obviously we hope that that's Lamar and the Ravens first to ultimately say something about that. And we'll get to their Super Bowl odds for Super Bowl 60, which is coming up in just a bit, a year from now in San Francisco. I'd be lying if I said I don't already. It's so fun. I remember these exact feelings and thoughts coming back from last year in Vegas, which we tag teamed together, of course, and it was an awesome experience. But you get back and there's just like, you can only imagine what it's like for the losing team, by the way, like feelings this morning, waking up and having to get back to life. But when you come down off the high of Super Bowl week, it really is this reset that's needed. And so I'm trying to like reprogram myself to get excited about something. And I'm like, I mean, it's a long way from now, but San Francisco next year, Levi Stadium, maybe the team that we cover on a daily basis is there. So anyway, I'm trying my best over here, partner. I'm trying.
I like it. Well, takeaway number 4, I think the Eagles would have beaten anyone, including the Ravens and Bills. And I say that because there were some tweets last night, both from people talking about the Ravens and the Bills. So Josina Anderson, who was just on the show with you last week, as you caught up with her at the Super Bowl in New Orleans, she tweeted last night in the middle of the game, would Lamar Jackson's Ravens have had a better showing so far as the AFC representative in the Super Bowl? Patrick Mahomes, and then she went into how he was getting beat up, Patrick Mahomes. Then there were a ton of tweets from the Bills side. There's just one from Bob Plankers who said the Bills would have been a better game. So I think it's probably, maybe would the Bills have given a better game? Maybe. But I know the Ravens would have, because we just had this matchup a little over a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, and the Eagles won by 5 points. So would it have been a better game? Probably. But I couldn't stand here and confidently say that the Ravens would have won. Like with the way the Eagles were dominating and just destroying that Chiefs offensive line, I think the Ravens offensive line is probably better than the Chiefs. Not probably, it is. Like that's been their Achilles heel forever. But I still have a hard time thinking that the offensive line would have kept Lamar clean the entire time. And Marlon Humphrey, this was last week. He said, I thought the Eagles were the best team we played this year. And the Ravens played both the Chiefs and the Eagles. And then a follower of his replied and said, yeah, the Eagles were the only team that, quote, truly beat us, the Ravens. Marlon Humphrey replied, bingo. The rest, we beat ourselves sadly. So you've got the Ravens, all-pro Marlo out here saying that the Eagles just straight up beat them. It wasn't the Ravens shooting themselves in the foot. Like they were just the better team. So would the Ravens have given a better team to the Eagles? History says yes, because of what we saw. But I'm still not sure. Bobby, I can't confidently sit here and say, oh, this Ravens team would have beaten the Eagles.
I can't either. I went back to some notes from that December 1st game that Marlon's talking about right now. And I definitely remember thinking that night and going into the bye that it was a self-inflicted loss. They left 7 points off the board. Justin did. And when I say they, he had 2 missed field goals that night and a PAT. What's that?
I said, that's true.
So I do remember that being a significant factor. Justin had a really tough night going into the bye. Let's see. I also had some notes here. The Ravens offense went 8 straight drives without scoring a touchdown. I remember Nelly had a significant drop that night, Nelson Aguilar. Lamar never found a rhythm. He had multiple fumbles, both of which were recovered. But again, that just kind of spoke to the lack of polish. He had some overthrows. He was 6 for 15 on third down and a garbage time touchdown away from being shut out in the second half. And then, you know what I wrote? I said, these are like my post-game notes that I do. This isn't a group that looks poised to make a Super Bowl run 5 weeks from now. That's what I wrote. So clearly, though, what did they do after that? They ripped off, the wins that they needed to close the regular season down the home stretch, and ultimately, found a way into the postseason and whatnot, and won a wild card game and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, despite those, we all know seeing a team twice usually looks very different. And so I would agree with you. I don't know what to hang my hat on in terms of confidence that it would have been different. Maybe not a blowout, but would have been a different outcome than it was December 1st.
Man, you're like reminding me of those Tucker misses in that game. For some reason, I had put him into a different game and kind of gone along with Marlowe here. I mean, I still feel like the Eagles were the toughest team, like just watching, right? The way it was just so tough to get every single yard, which is why they had to rely on Tucker, right? And so that's why I remember the Eagles being tougher. It's because the Ravens just seemed to be able to move the ball against other teams.
Yeah.
And then they were good in the red zone. But on this one, yeah, like they had to rely on Tucker because they weren't able to get as close as they normally do. So that's a good reminder. So there was some shooting themselves in the foot a bit.
I was going to say, just to reiterate, 7 points.
Yeah.
2 missed field goals and a PAT were left off the board in a game that was 20. You have the final score here, 24-19. So, By the way, another note, I just scrolled down and I didn't see it the first time. Quote, Philly's defensive front bullied Baltimore.
Yes.
That's what I have here. So
I remember that distinctly.
So clearly, a lot of these things that we saw play out last night, we already had seen in Baltimore December 1st prior to the bye.
I definitely remember that. But now that after watching the Chiefs, there are levels to bullying because the smackdown they put on the Chiefs offensive line was not the same as the Ravens, and yet they dominated both, but there were levels to it for sure.